Let me say something that most men don't want to hear. You are not undisciplined because you lack motivation. You are undisciplined because you are addicted to it. Motivation feels powerful. It feels like momentum. It feels like you're about to change your life. But it is nothing more than an emotional spike. And emotional spikes are temporary. You wake up fired up. You watch something inspiring. You feel ready. You promise yourself this time is different. And then a few days later it fades. Not because you are weak, but because motivation was never meant to carry weight. It was never designed to build identity. Motivation is a feeling. Discipline is a decision. And feelings fluctuate. That's the problem. Most men build their life on emotional weather. If they feel good, they work. If they feel inspired, they act. If they feel confident, they speak. But if the feeling disappears, so does the effort. That means your productivity is controlled by your mood. And if your mood controls you, you don't control yourself. Strong men don't wait to feel ready. They don't wait for inspiration. They don't wait for energy. They operate from identity. And identity does not ask how you feel today. Identity says this is who I am, so this is what I do. Motivation asks, do I feel like it? Discipline says, it doesn't matter. That is the difference. Motivation is temporary. Discipline is structural. Motivation gives you a spark. Discipline builds a system. And systems are what change lives. If you only act when motivated, you are training yourself to depend on emotion. And dependence is weakness. Because the moment life becomes uncomfortable, your motivation disappears. The gym feels heavy. The work feels boring. The process feels repetitive. And without emotional stimulation, you quit. That is why so many men restart their lives every Monday. They are chasing emotional intensity instead of building internal stability. Real strength is not emotional excitement. It is emotional nurture. Ality. It is showing up when nothing feels dramatic. It is doing the work when nobody is watching. It is keeping your word when your mood shifts. Motivation makes you start. Discipline makes you continue. And continuation is what creates power. The world is full of motivated men. Very few disciplined ones. That's why most people look intense but remain average. They have bursts. They don't have structure. And structure is what creates authority. If you want real power, stop asking how to feel motivated. Start asking who you are becoming. Because once discipline becomes your identity, you don't negotiate with yourself anymore. And the moment you stop negotiating with yourself, you stop being controlled by temporary emotions. Most men confuse discipline with intensity. They think discipline means extreme routines, cold showers, 4 a.m. wake-ups, loud declarations about grind and sacrifice. That's not discipline. That's performance. Discipline is quiet. It doesn't need witnesses. It doesn't need dramatic music. It doesn't need a new version of you every week. Discipline is repetition without negotiation. The reason motivation feels so good is because it gives you dopamine before results. You feel productive before you've done anything. You feel powerful before you've proven anything. It's emotional credit. And like any credit, it must be paid back with effort. But disciplined men don't rely on emotional credit. They operate on standards. And standards don't move. A standard says, this is done every day, regardless of mood. This is completed regardless of comfort. This is followed regardless of excitement. When discipline becomes identity, the question is no longer, do I want to? The question becomes, does this align with who I am? That is a different psychological position. Motivation is external stimulation. Discipline is internal alignment. Motivation comes from videos, music, speeches, comparison. Discipline comes from self-respect. When you don't follow through on your commitments, you weaken your own authority. Every broken promise to yourself lowers your internal credibility. And when you don't trust yourself, your confidence collapses. That's why so many motivated men still feel insecure. They don't have proof. They have emotions. Discipline creates proof. It builds evidence. It builds track record. And track record builds identity. If you train when you don't feel like it, you become someone who trains. If you work when you're tired, you become someone who executes. If you stay consistent when results are slow, you become someone stable. Stability is power. Motivation makes you intense. Discipline makes you reliable. And reliability creates authority. Nobody respects the man who shows up only when inspired. People respect the man who shows up regardless. That's because discipline signals control. And control signals strength. If your behavior depends on how you feel, then your life will fluctuate. But if your behavior depends on standards, your life will stabilize. Strong men are not emotionally explosive. They are structurally consistent. They don't chase emotional highs. They build habits that survive emotional lows. That is the difference between temporary change and permanent transformation. Motivation may start the journey, but discipline defines who you become. Here is the uncomfortable truth. If you constantly need motivation, you don't lack inspiration. You lack structure. And if you lack structure, you lack control. Most men say they want discipline, but what they really want is to feel driven. They want the emotional rush. They want to feel like they are transforming. They want intensity without repetition. But repetition is boring. Repetition is quiet. Repetition does not give applause. And that is why most people avoid it. Discipline is not exciting. It is predictable. It is doing the same thing again when nobody cares. It is executing when there is no emotional reward attached. That's why it builds identity. Because identity is formed by what you do repeatedly, not what you feel occasionally. Motivation makes you talk about goals. Discipline makes you live them. Motivation makes you announce change. Discipline makes you demonstrate it. And demonstration is what builds credibility. If your behavior changes every time your mood changes, your character has no weight. Weight comes from consistency. And consistency only comes from discipline. The reason discipline feels hard is because it removes emotional negotiation. There is no debate. There is no maybe tomorrow. There is no waiting for the right mindset. There is action because it is part of who you are. Weak men depend on excitement. Strong men depend on standards. Weak men chase intensity. Strong men build systems. Weak men need to feel ready. Strong men move regardless. That difference determines everything. Because when life becomes difficult, motivation disappears first. Stress kills inspiration. Pressure kills hype. Fatigue kills excitement. And what remains is structure. If there is no structure, there is collapse. If there is structure, there is stability. That stability creates confidence. Not the loud type. The quiet type. The kind that doesn't need validation. Because it is backed by proof. Discipline is proof. Proof that you show up. Proof that you exec. Gutta. Proof that you don't break when it's inconvenient. And that proof builds identity. Once discipline becomes identity, you stop trying to change yourself every month. You stop restarting. You stop relying on emotional surges. You become steady. And steady men are rare. Rare men are respected. Let's end this clearly. Motivation is a visitor. Discipline is a resident. Motivation shows up, makes noise, gives you energy, then disappears when things get uncomfortable. Discipline stays. It doesn't care about your mood. It doesn't care about how inspired you feel. It operates because it is part of who you are. And identity is stronger than emotion. Most men are trapped in a cycle. They wait to feel different before they act different. They wait to feel confident before they move. They wait to feel ready before they commit. But identity doesn't wait for feelings. Identity dictates behavior. If you identify as someone disciplined, you don't negotiate with your alarm clock. You don't negotiate with your standards. You don't negotiate with effort. You execute because that is what someone like you does. That's the shift. When discipline becomes identity, action becomes automatic. You don't rely on willpower every day. You rely on structure. And structure removes decision fatigue. The more you rely on motivation, the more fragile your progress becomes. Because the moment your environment changes, your performance changes. But when you rely on discipline, your environment can collapse and you still move. That's strength. Not emotional hype. Not temporary intensity. Stability. Stability under boredom. Stability under stress. Stability under pressure. That is what separates men who talk about growth from men who embody it. Motivation will help you start. Discipline will define who you become. And the man you become is built from what you repeat, not what you feel. So stop chasing motivation. Stop waiting for excitement. Stop trying to feel powerful before you act powerful. Build standards. Build repetition. Build habits that survive your lowest days. Because once discipline becomes identity, you don't need motivation anymore. You don't rise and fall with emotional weather. You become constant. And constant men build real authority.